Coming up with an economic outlook for Sub-Saharan Africa is never easy, but this one has proven extra challenging.
What really struck me are two things in particular. It's really the fragility of the economies in the region, but at the same time also the resilience.
Living on the Edge is the title of the latest regional economic outlook for Sub-Saharan Africa. And in this episode, we hear an economist on the team walk us through the research behind the report, which you can download at imf.org.
My name is Wenjie Chen. I'm a Deputy Division Chief in the African Department's Regional Economic Outlook Division. And before that, I also worked in the Asia-Pacific Department on China and the World Economic Outlook team.
Great. Thanks so much. And welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
So there's lots going on out there in the world that's disrupting economies everywhere. What should Sub-Saharan Africa be worrying about most at this point?
So in the report, we highlight many things, but in particular, two things come to mind. One is the rising food and energy prices, and that's of particular concern to us as they really impact the region's most vulnerable. In fact, in one of the notes, we project by the end of 2022, at least 123 million people in Sub-Saharan Africa are expected to face acute food insecurity. Oh. The second worry that we have is more general, and it's about the growing macroeconomic imbalances. And what I mean by that is growing inflation that we see in the region, but also coming from elsewhere as an external shock. And secondly, we see higher debt, so higher deficits that lead to rising debt in the region in terms of levels we haven't seen in several decades. And all of this comes really against a backdrop of global turmoil in terms of heightened uncertainty, more frequent and more extreme climate disasters that's impacting the region, and also increasing geopolitical tensions.
So I might just ask you to step back a little and talk to me a little bit about the nuts and bolts that goes into this report. Maybe, walk me through the process of how you guys determine what the key priorities are for the region. How do you do the triage when there are so many factors at play?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So the Regional Economic Outlook on Sub-Saharan Africa, it comes out twice a year, usually during the spring in April, coinciding with the spring meetings, and then in the fall in October, coinciding with the annual meetings of the IMF. And so before each cycle is over, of course, we already start about the next one. And it's a very collaborative process. We're a division of many economists within the African department, and the topics are really chosen through multiple different channels. It's through our day-to-day work with country authorities from the department and the country teams, through internal discussions in terms of what these country teams tell us are really important to their authorities. And the other thing that we do is also internally discuss ongoing projects that are part of the building and the IMF in terms of relevance that we have found from other departments. And here it could be a confluence of different analysis of the conjuncture that's happening, but also of longer term projects that we think might be of macro importance to the world's economy and in particular to the region, to Sub-Saharan Africa. So we discuss these as we go along, and then in the end, we boil down to several topics. And in this case, we zeroed in on 4 topics, really a balance between conjunctural, so what's immediate in terms of, for instance, the food security, insecurity topic, the tackling of rising inflation, but also with a longer term in mind, particularly in terms of the energy transition, as well as the digital currency innovation topic. And then one of the chapters, the conjunctural chapters, is really about the now and with a view into policy recommendations that we think can help authorities navigate the current situation and looking ahead as well.
So you do compare notes with other departments because these reports happen in various regions of the world, and departments within the fund are working hard on those as well. So you do compare those notes. So were there any big surprises when you started digging into those 3 or 4 areas? I mean, like you said, you do these reports every 6 months. So what happened in the past 6 months that shifted trends one way or the other?
Yes. So to be completely here transparent, I joined the department actually about six weeks ago. So I wasn't part of the 6 months hard work that my amazing colleagues did. Mm-hmm. But in terms of things that were surprising to me, and certainly that because I actually worked in the Africa department back in 2014 and then had about a few years of hiatus where I worked in other departments. When I came back this time, what really struck me are 2 things in particular. It's really the fragility of the economies in the region, but at the same time, also the resilience. And let me explain a little bit by what I mean. So back in 2014, when I started early in the year in 2014, I remember working on Sub-Saharan African countries was really seeing these countries enjoying the takeoff post-1990s. Right. What I mean by that is they enjoyed high growth. They enjoyed very good external environment, especially of China growing and having a lot of demand for Sub-Saharan Africa's exports. Mm-hmm. Inflation was relatively low. Debt was relatively low. So the situation seemed very positive in a way in terms of growth. And we didn't expect oil prices to go down that much. However, now with the pandemic, with the war in Ukraine, so the crisis upon crisis, for me this time coming back, it's a very different situation. And so it's a reminder of how incredibly fragile this region is in terms of the external shocks that it can hit. But at the same time, what I found is that also, despite what we see in terms of the growing macroeconomic imbalances, what we call, so the higher inflation, the higher debt, we're not in a widespread debt crisis at all. So this is not the, prior to 1990 situation that those countries were facing. So, and then that has to do a lot with the resilience that the countries have built since then, thanks to good domestic reforms, but also in particular to building the buffers during that time to withstand some of these shocks. Now, more can be done, and that's what we put into the report in terms of many of the policy recommendations going forward to rebuild that resilience, but also to address the acute problems that the countries are facing.
And you mentioned the war in Ukraine. To what degree is Sub-Saharan Africa tied into what's going on in the world economy in those terms? I mean, you have extremely high inflation globally, geopolitics. To what degree is Africa actually affected by all this?
Now, Sub-Saharan Africa is incredibly connected to these global developments. And as you mentioned, it's the global growth slowdown, the high inflation, which as a reaction, many advanced economies have raised their interest rates, which then in turn have led to tighter global financial conditions. Yeah. And certainly the war in Ukraine also exacerbated what we already experienced during the pandemic in terms of the global supply chains being disrupted, that then in turn have fed into higher inflation, and especially in terms of rising energy prices and food prices for the region. Yeah. That has been quite the toll on the region. So yes, absolutely. Sub-Saharan African economies are so linked to what's happening in the global economy. So all these shocks certainly affect the countries.
And do you worry that Africa is perhaps put on the back burner when there's major crises elsewhere in the world? And, like with the world's attention on the war in Ukraine, for example?
In fact, yes. So what we found is that financial support, for instance, from the international community to the region is in secular decline. So as a percent, for instance, of recipient GDP, OECD official development financing has declined from about 4.5% in the 1990s to now below 3%. So it is even more troubling that also humanitarian assistance is being increasingly compressed, especially in this time when we know that food insecurity issues have really risen to the fore in these countries. And as a consequence, many sub-Saharan African countries are thus slashing their spending or are being forced to turn elsewhere, generally to more costly type of financing. And that could then therefore have negative impacts on their overall economy. So therefore, in the report, we also have a call for the international community to step up. If you think about the potential that is there in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, at least half of the new entrants into the global labor force are actually coming from sub-Saharan Africa over the next decade. Not investing in the region, not supporting it would really be a strong detriment of the global economy.
So we all have something to benefit by supporting the region in its economic development.
Absolutely.
So what can readers expect from this regional outlook for sub-Saharan Africa? It's one report, but other institutions also do a lot of research. OECD, as you just mentioned there, World Bank, several UN agencies and NGOs. What do you find in this type of research that the IMF is putting out that isn't in those other reports?
First of all, I think all these institutions are doing very important work on the region and during this very difficult conjuncture. And in a way, we all complement each other's work, and we have common goals of promoting economic development and growth for the region. But where the IMF is unique is that it has a mandate to promote global macroeconomic and financial stability among our 190 member countries. And so what that means is we operate at a macro level, think big picture, right? And often a cited example is taking a bird's eye view from 30,000 feet. And there we look into all the various linkages that are important to sustain systemic stability, that reduce vulnerabilities or any kind of cross-country spillovers, or macro financial linkages. So identifying and studying these linkages at a macro level is really the bread and butter of our fund work here. And that is also very relevant for policymakers. So given that we have these macroeconomic issues at our core, we choose these topics with a macro criticality in mind. So that's why we have the food insecurity, the energy transition, how to manage inflation, because those are all going to be so important for the economic well-being of these countries.
All right. So I'd like to end by asking you a bit of a personal question about your own experience doing this type of research. And I realize, like you said, you're new to this team of economists in the African department who put this particular report together, but you've done, you're not new to the fund, and you've done a lot of work in other regions, including China and Asia. Are there any aspects of this type of research process that you find particularly rewarding or challenging, perhaps?
Yeah. So before I worked at the IMF, I was actually a professor at a university. And so I always enjoyed doing research, and I always found it very rewarding to have analysis done that could help inform the public and policymakers. But since I joined the IMF, I feel that even more so here, our research is so applicable and so policy focused. And this reminded me during the annual meetings that just happened a week or so ago that when we had the chance to talk to policymakers, to ministers, to central bankers, that they were really interested in the topics that we had covered, and they were also interested in the policy recommendations and this symbiosis of our research, but also being able to contribute in a meaningful way to the policy work that is ongoing, to have real life impact, so to speak, I think is one of the most rewarding aspects of the job here at the IMF. And it is challenging going forward, working on Sub-Saharan Africa. In terms of the issues that we identified, those are going to continue for the region. And amid this very turbulent time in the global economy, again, I think supporting these African economies will be crucial through this time as it is an integral part to the world economy.
Yes, so something to consider for our young listeners, aspiring economists, perhaps.
Absolutely.
So on that, I would also encourage anyone out there interested in the economic development of the region to go to imf.org and download the latest regional economic outlook for Sub-Saharan Africa. It's chock-a-block with analysis that you just won't find anywhere else. So Wenjie Chen, Deputy Division Chief in the Regional Studies Division in the IMF African Department, thank you so much for giving us some insight into this great research.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. It was a pleasure talking to you, Bruce.
So again, that was IMF's Wenjie Chen talking about the latest regional economic outlook for Sub-Saharan Africa, which you can download at imf.org. And look for other IMF podcasts on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also follow us on Twitter at IMF_podcast. I'm Bruce Edwards. Thanks for listening.